This is Craftwork, a podcast by writers for writers, with your hosts, Mike Thorne
and Miriam Riche. Craftwork is recorded and produced in Fredericton, New Brunswick, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Wolastoqiyik, the people of the Wolastoq River.
The music for this podcast is composed and recorded by Randy Nickel Schroeder.
Previously a film critic, journalist, and teacher, Gemma Files has been an award-winning horror author since 1999. She's best known for her novel Experimental Film and her collections of short fiction, including the Bram Stoker award-winning In That Endlessness, Our End, and Blood from the Air. Her next book, Little Horn, will be out in October from Shortwave. She is the autistic mother of an autistic son. For fun, she sings and doodles pretty monsters. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. It's such a pleasure to speak to you, a Canadian horror legend. To kick off, what were some of the texts or stories or books or films that first got you excited about narrative? What were some of your earliest literary or narrative loves?
All right, so my parents gave me the D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths and the Norse gods and giants pretty early on. Fell deeply in love with Loki, the ultimate because fuck you, that's why guy. Someone who's driven by the true spirit of perversity to screw himself over as much as he screws other people over, which is, a very me kind of thing. The second thing that I really felt attracted to was weirdly Cyrano de Bergerac. I remember watching the version with Jose Ferrer, and because my parents are both actors, I think I saw a theatrical version of that particular translation of Cyrano de Bergerac, which is the one that I really bonded with. There's just something about, for a person who didn't know they were autistic until much later in life, there's something about a person who is different that you become extremely attracted to. And also the whole thing of words and storytelling and talking your way into things and talking your way out of things. And the feeling that you will never be loved, which is a strange thing to think about when you're 8, but yeah, the feeling that you will never be loved in the way that you would like to be loved by the people that you would like to love you. So Cyrano, Loki, and C.S. Lewis. My parents read me the Narnia books, and the one that, I bonded pretty bigly with, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. I bonded with all of them. But the one that really stuck around in my brain was, of course, The Magician's Nephew, in which we find out the backstory of the White Witch. And again, Jadis of Charn, for some reason, it was sort of okay, I know I'm not supposed to think of her as a role model, but there's something about a 7-foot woman who can pick guys up and throw them. And is perfectly fine saying, victory, yes, but not for you. And then I spoke the word, the deplorable word, and a moment later, only I stood beneath the sun. Pretty damn good, I gotta say. So again, it's fantasies of power, fantasies of not giving a fuck. Just rolling through the universe like boss. There's something about that. And also just the idea of being that beautiful and singular. But, what brings all three of these things together is language. And for a long time, I have rejected what I got from my dad in particular, because my parents broke up when I was about 8. And my dad ended up going back to Australia. It's whatever they felt about each other, and they felt a lot of things about each other, they went out of their way to try and make my childhood pretty good, so that I was kind of like the fulcrum of their relationship. So strangely enough, when you remove yourself from that, it sets up ripples. But the fact is that my father was the person who got me obsessed with history. He and my mom modeled Shakespeare for me. They would literally go through Shakespearean plays in front of me. And he was the guy who introduced me to Kipling, who's an asshole, but he's got an amazing style, an incredible, particularly the Jungle Book and the second Jungle Book, which made me fall in love with India without knowing anything about India except what he told me and what he showed me, and not with the idea of the British in India, but with the idea of these Indian animals and their amazing interior life, and these Indian people and their amazing interior life. I mean, again, it's one of those weird things that colonizers fall in love with the places that they colonize, that there's a kind of exoticism that the best people can kind of, the most talented people, shall we say, can kind of internalize. And they're like, this is so wonderful. I want it. I want it. Oh, I want your songs and I want your stories. Just let me in. It's like Remick in Sinners, right? Anyways, but yeah, so all of that language is what binds that together, and a sense of if you find the right voice, you can understand anybody, no matter how strange they are, and no matter how dislikable they are, no matter the awful things they do. And that, that's sort of been my main guiding principle, I guess.
Your parents both being actors, you say they modeled Shakespeare for you. It must have been a lot of personas or characters in your house in terms of actually bringing people to life through dialogue. I imagine that would be really helpful for a writer to grow up in an environment where you're not just modeling how people talk, you're modeling how,
characters talk.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And both my parents got work at the CBC doing radio plays. And after my dad left, my mom did a lot of radio work. And so I was very, very used at an early age to going to, like a darkened studio and sitting in the back and drawing on the backs of scripts as my parents stood next to a microphone and pretended to be other people. And also, I was very used to theater. And theater is really interesting, particularly for someone like me who then went on to become a film critic, because film is completely different from theater. The wonderful thing about film, and also the weirdly reductive thing about film, is that it's all about this illusion of reality. It's like, of course this is real because there's a camera and, stuff is happening in front of it. And, it's like, I got it on film. Of course it's real, Whereas with theater, it's not real, like from the beginning, because it's just a box. It's an empty stage. And also, I was born in 1968, so this would have been in the 1970s. So yeah, it was very much an empty stage. There weren't like a lot of tricks. It was very experimental, weird shit. So basically, it's the difference between a beautifully set up landscape and a castle that's maybe half CGI and half not, and people in beautiful costumes, and a person just stepping onto stage, maybe not even wearing anything but their normal clothes, and saying, "Why, this is Illyria, lady." And you're just supposed to go, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely." Tell me about that. Tell me more about that. So the great thing about both of those things was that it taught me that anybody could be anyone and any place could be anything. And again, language is like a spell. Language is poetry. Language is dreaming in advance. And the inherent trick of fiction is that you sit down and you tell somebody a story that both of you know is not true, but you tell it in such a way that the person says, maybe it is. So yeah, with me, everything begins with voice. I have a bunch of things that I'm noodling around with at the back of my head right now, because I always am, and it's all contingent on, yes, you get the plot, you get ideas about sequences, you get ideas about images, you get a general premise, but until you get a character with a voice that you can not just see through, but have the story told through, told to you and therefore to others, it's kind of dead. It's not alive yet. It's not ready to go. So my process always is that either I get the voice first or I get the voice later, but until I get the voice, things don't progress much further than, oh, this would be kind of neat.
A lot of what you're saying has me thinking about something you said to me, that you make your life into a story and retell it. Mm. And then you also said, I lie for a living. I also truth for a living, which reminded me of the famous Stephen King quote that good fiction is the truth inside the lie. So you're talking about these different layers of fictionality, or how we kind of buy into the illusion of truth in fiction. Yeah. What does it mean for you to, quote unquote, tell the truth in fiction? How do you go about that as a writer?
I mean, particularly when you're doing horror, but also particularly when you're doing anything fantastic. A lot of people were like, you don't write horror, you write the dark fantastic. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I write horror, but whatever. The point is that you're putting somebody in a situation, you're introducing them to a situation where you want them to feel uncomfortable, and you want them to be worried for themselves, which is going to be really hard, because you're tricking somebody into feeling worried because of something that they're showing themselves inside their brain, which is naturally going to vary from person to person. The way that you can do that is to root it in something that means something to you, because then that reality, that sense of reality, that sense of, a threat, or that sense of a worry, or that sense of an emotional hook, is going to transfer from you through your words to them. And they'll be like, oh, that's never happened to me, but I remember this one thing that happened to me that reminds me of this thing that supposedly happened to you. I think this is pretty much how I drifted somehow into mainly writing particularly with stories, mainly writing in the first person, or sometimes the second person when I want to get it done real fast. You do this, you do that, this happens to you, this happens to blah, blah, It's almost like a weird kind of filter between me and the matter that allows me to go a little faster than I normally would. So I look for something which I can use. It's a piece of grit to form a pearl around. And the piece of grit is always something from my personal experience or from the experience of someone else, but they told it to me in such a way that it reminded me of something that I could glom onto. And I was like, well, what would have happened if I was that person? What would have happened if I was in that situation? Probably the best example of this is experimental film, but let's not get into all that right now. But within the situation of a story, the best example is probably the Puppet Motel from In That Endlessness, Our End. So once upon a time, I managed 2 Airbnbs. One of them was okay. The other one was the Puppet Motel. So that was really easy for me, because every time I'd walk into the Puppet Motel, I'd be like, oh shit, I have to write down all the ways that this place is fucked up, and also all the ways that I would never ever want to stay here. I mean, it was hilarious because the guy who owned both of these properties was living in Korea at the time, and I don't think he'd ever seen either of them for more than half an hour. But I don't know how you could walk into that place and be like, oh, okay, so everything's black and gray, and the window looks out onto a courtyard, which is just complete concrete, and there's almost no direct light, and somebody painted the entire bathroom black and put black tiles in there, and the light in the bathroom doesn't work, and all the bulbs keep blowing. So every time you go there and turn on the light, a couple of bulbs blow and you have to go around and replace them. And also there's this tone, just this kind of tone, and it kind of sounds sick. It's like someone's trying to hypnotize you from very far away. And then I added a couple of other things, like the thing about putting a marble down on the floor and it rolling across the floor in a kind of zigzag pattern because the floor wasn't laid correctly. That wasn't true of the Puppet Motel. But it was true of a place that I stayed in New York once, which I think was subsiding. I mean, I literally walked in and I was like, I feel nauseous. Why is that? And then I realized that it was literally a Lovecraftian Airbnb. It was like all the angles were wrong. But it is true that in the Puppet Motel, every time I went in there to clean up after somebody, I would feel like I was losing time. Everything seemed to take a really long time, and you'd never have any idea of what time of day it would be when you'd left. So I would literally put on the alarm on my phone. It's like, okay, it's half an hour. You got to go. You got to get out of here. You know? Something's going to happen if you stay. So, that little bit of weirdness, it was not a nice experience. It was just, that thing of doing a job that you're doing for somebody else who's in another country. And, it's like dealing with 50 people a week. It's like, yeah, no, like a bunch of things that people can absolutely, and the whole gig economy thing. I think a lot of people can find something in the Puppet Motel that makes them go, oh yeah, good, entry point. Now tell me something really crazy. Oh, okay. Well, the really crazy part is that my phone started to talk to me. And also, if you stayed in that place long enough, which I had to because my boyfriend kicked me out, you probably get sucked inside the wall and eaten slowly by something. Who knows? So you begin with something that is understandable and has its roots in some sort of emotional reality for you, and that becomes the entry point through which you can push everything else, hopefully.
I had read in an interview about this terrifying Airbnb, and all this reminds me, the way that you're relaying it, reminds me of a course that you teach called Write What You Fear, which is getting curious about why do things make one uncomfortable. And you offered the following advice in this course, which is, quote, the more specific your details and characterization, the wider an audience of people your fiction will attract, unquote. So you're kind of talking right now about specifics with the subsiding floor and the almost like a tinnitus sound in the air and like a weird tone. That's such a good, in my opinion, like the best approach to writing. I think you answered some of this already. But when you say kind of this specifics, are you referring to the immediacy of concrete description and its ability to suck someone in? Or is it something more nuanced than that to you?
In a lot of ways, like super woke ways, I'm talking about identity. Particularly with horror movies, we have this debate that we go through over and over and over again, where it's like, oh, why are people in horror movies so boring? Why are people in horror movies so stupid? Why are people in horror movies so, bland, blah, blah, blah. And 9 times out of 10, it's because people assume, and one assumes that it's producers or production companies, they assume that unless you make the people in a weird situation as bland as humanly possible, you won't get the largest audience, which is nuts to me, because to be frank, some of the biggest indie hits that I've ever seen, things like, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to take 3 things that are actually true about me as a human being, and a creator, and I'm going to spin a movie out of that, and I'll get all the fat people, all the women who are older and want to snag a hot guy, all the Greeks, all the people who are used to being part of a smaller version of, like you'll probably also get the Italians, the Spanish thing, blah, blah, blah. It's like all the people who are used to being sort of white, but not, la la, socially. And we see that very well with something like Sinners. Sinners is wrong on all the Hollywood levels because it's too black, it's too specifically Mississippi, it's too specifically during a historical period where horrible things are happening and nobody wants to talk about those things anymore. And apparently it's become illegal to talk about those things in the States now. There's too much sex. I've literally had people say, well, I really liked it, but it was way too horny. And I'm like, what? It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, the weird part is that, it's like I'm not even as horny as I used to be because I'm 57 years old and I have a 20-year-old kid. I've gone through menopause. But my God, it's like, do you have something against boobs? Do you have something against spit? Do you have something against cunnilingus? Do you have something against that? It's like, it's like, are you under the impression that vampires aren't the horniest monsters in the world? Because they are, and they always have been. They're so horny that most people don't even think they are monsters. And the thing that I certainly found for myself is that all the things that I thought made me unlovable and hard to deal with and too much on every level, those are the things that I needed to double down on. Those are the things that I needed to go into as far as possible. Too angry, too horny, too weird. Way too much about Canadian film. Why is there so much Canadian film in this book? It's about a woman who works in Canadian film. Canadian film is her hyperfixation and her job. And also it is 3 pages of a 300-page book. Come on.
Speaking of experimental film, I love that novel. It's fantastic. And I feel like it showcases your interest in the formal expressions of content. Like it pulls a lot on cinematic grammar. And I also saw it as a book about research and the accrual of knowledge. And the book itself is in some ways built from those things. And you also play with content and form in many of your short stories too. Yeah. Kind of a broad question, but how do you think about the relationship between content and form in a novel or a story as you're writing it?
That's a good one. We all know that things begin in pastiche, right? Finding your own voice begins in pastiche. And in a lot of ways, the reason it begins in pastiche is because one of the first things that you find is what you're attracted to and what you want more of. And only later do you realize, this is the same reason that people write fanfic. And by the way, I write fanfic. I haven't done it for a while, but I definitely do write it anyway. So you become attracted to a certain voice, a certain type of language. You become attracted to a certain type of narrative. You become attracted to a certain type of character, and you try to reproduce those things. But as you go further, you realize what it is that's attracting you to those qualities. You find the you in those things, and then you write and write and write, and you try to cut away all the things in your writing that don't sound like you, sort of. Okay. Now, in terms of content versus delivery system, what I find interesting is that there are basically 2 ways that you can go about it. And the first one is like very simple kind of choices, tense choices, plot choices, to show or not to show. One of the things that I picked up from film, I think, is the idea of implication, like what is inside the frame and what's outside the frame. And commentary as well, although that's more from, I'd say, Vertigo Comics, where everything is in the service of the story, and it doesn't matter whether it's diegetic music and sound effects and what's inside the frame and what's outside the frame and dialogue. You can see the balloon of someone's dialogue without seeing the person, etc. Who's narrating it? Is there a narrator? Is the narrator Stan Lee, or is the narrator an actual character in the story who is telling the story? So all of those things are like very simple kind of structural choices. And then you move on to things like, am I going to make this a story told in a different time period with attention paid to writing it as though I were a person from that time period? Am I going to look at ways that people from that time period wrote, not just the voice, but also the actual, it's like huge paragraphs, lots of particular types of punctuation. This person's going to sound like Emily Dickinson. This other person's going to sound like Bram Stoker. And of course, I've fell deeply in love since I read Dracula when I was about 10 or 11 with the idea of epistolary, because the great part about that is that you can write from several different people's points of view in several different people's voices, and then you stick them together like a collage. It's like letters and newspaper coverage and telegrams and diary entries and how did you find all this, and then you go even further, because it's like, who collated this stuff in the first place? Who's the person who put all this stuff together? Why did they put all this stuff together? What are they telling you by the way that they put all this stuff together? Who's curating this story? Is it possible that near the end you could find something that they deliberately left out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? This I use when I'm jump starting a story a lot, like one from column A, one from column B. It's like a particular thing, concept, idea, monster, plot twist. And then over here, a particular mood, which often comes from my idea of a particular author to model the mood of the story on. So, it's like mummy story written by Robert Aikman. What would that be like? It's like, let's try to break that down, Or a Laird Baron does a haunted house. What would that be like? Maybe the house would be in Alaska. Maybe it wouldn't. It would be somewhere very different, but he would come at it from angles that maybe I would not come at it from.
A lot of the things bound up in experimental film are very connected to some of the research I've been working on recently, which is thinking about how horror and the Gothic have always written about themselves, and how they're defined by that reflexivity from the beginning, with, of course, the Castle of Otranto as a found document text, all the way up to Stephen King constantly writing about writing and beyond. Dracula, you mentioned, Frankenstein.
Yep.
It's just that this is so embedded in what the Gothic is and does. And part of what I loved about experimental film was how you updated and remixed some of those found text Gothic conventions within the film milieu with the kind of elaborate construction of that novel, which to some degree reminded me a little bit of Peter Straub at times.
Oh, that's a really nice thing to say. I love Straub, and I think in the long run, although I love Uncle Stevie too, I do write more like Straub than I do ever write like King, simply because my shit is more, what do you call that? Recursive?
Yeah.
It's very self-referential because autism. It's like, I don't know much, but I know myself. I don't really understand anything except myself. Okay, so two things about experimental film, which only just occurred to me. One is that it is a series of not so carefully controlled info dumps. It's like, let me tell you everything I know about this. And let me tell you everything I know about this. Let me tell you everything I know about this and this and this and this. And some of it is like, everything I know about, teaching at a diploma mill, everything I know about, losing my job, everything I know about, feeling really depressed, everything I know about, a particular type of fairy tale, everything I know about a particular type of mythology, everything I know about a particular type of filmmaking, etc., 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 etc. But the fact that it's a not particularly well-controlled series of recursive info dumps also reveals that it is as much about a person realizing that this thing that they find so difficult to deal with in their child comes from them, and what they're being haunted by, as much as Lady Midday and as much as anything else, as much as Mrs. A. McCalla Wickham, is they're being haunted by their own autism. They're being haunted by the realization that they too are who they are. Lois spends a lot of time rejecting who she is. Lois spends a lot of time being like, it's so nice that I'm surrounded by people who don't think I'm awful, because I am fucking awful. It is awful to me. And I wish I felt better about myself, because then I could help my kid feel better about himself. But no, that wasn't even my experience with my son at the time that I wrote it. It was written out of the worst part of that journey. And leaning into it was hard, but obviously it had to be done. And I think that's the most useful thing you can get out of it. So yeah, I agree. The Gothic is almost always about your shadow self. It's like, how did this happen? It's your fault. You did it. It's just, you live in this fucking Jungian world. But on the other hand, I once told the guys from This Is Horror that being neurodivergent in a allistic world is like living in a horror universe, because something's always going to go wrong, and that it's always going to go wrong, and whatever goes wrong, it's your fault, even if you don't know how it went wrong or what it was that you did. It's just true. I've gotten a lot better at accepting it over like the last 10 years, which is good. I think I'm about as happy as I've been in my whole life now, and that's pleasant. But sometimes it just slaps me in the face that, just my brain works differently. And at no point will I ever be able to get away from my mom and I just, banging heads about something. I'll say, yeah, I can't do that because of X and Y, and she'll go, that makes no sense, like no sense at all. And I'm like, okay, can we skip this part? The part where you tell me that it makes no sense, because it's the way it's going to have to be. It's just the way it's going to have to be. It's like, try to give me a little bit of the leeway that you give Cal. It's like, yeah, it makes no sense when he does that, but there we go. You're going to be talking to Mr. Rabbit instead. You'll be talking to Mr. Hand. He'll be telling you that he doesn't want something, and then his hand will tell him that he does. Oh, Cal, you do. And only recently did I discover that there's a name for that, which is PDA, persistent drive for autonomy. Yes.
Oh, is that what I thought it stood for? Demand avoidance. Okay,
it
interesting.
Does in fact stand for demand avoidance, but autistic people call it persistent drive for autonomy.
That makes
pathological demand avoidance. I'm
is that what the P
why
stands
you gotta call
for?
it that? That's insane.
Totally. Absurd.
But yeah, my son has that, and in hindsight, so do I. I definitely have these moments where I'm like, nope, can't do it. I mean, I can make myself do it, but you won't like it.
What you're saying about kind of writing through personal experience, like I also am neurodivergent, I have ADHD. I've only recently started to think of it as not a learning disability, but more like a challenge and a gift, a set of traits that...
A way of being.
Exactly. Yeah. For better or for worse, of course. So this question I had about experimental film, but I think you could apply it to a lot of things. I was just thinking about working through stuff, and you were talking about parenthood and having parents and all those tricky things. And I've always been struck by this Shirley Jackson quote, in which she says, "The first book is the book you have to write to get back at your parents. Once you get that out of your way, you can start writing books," unquote. And so as an early career writer, I often wonder what I'll write once I've used up the majority of my autobiographical material. You're talking about like info dumps of, just feeling the compulsion to get certain things out. Knowing that some of your writing, not just experimental film, but a lot of your writing is deeply personal, I'm wondering how you feel about this line of reasoning as someone who's experienced, like you have a very long history. You started publishing in the 90s, I believe, maybe even earlier than that.
Yeah.
So did you feel at any point in time that you had kind of exercised that?
Well, the interesting thing is, in hindsight, is that I actually think I did that backwards, the way that I often do things, which is that, I began by trying to write away from myself as much as humanly possible. If you look at the stuff in Kissing Carrion and The Worm in Every Heart, which are my first two collections of short fiction, and that was like everything that I'd written up to that point, they both came out within, I don't know, a couple of months of each other or something like that. Kissing Carrion in particular is very over the top in a Barker-esque kind of way. I think I wrote a couple of things in there which were about, like, one of them is about my grandmother, but most of them are very, very consciously, I'm gonna be a guy. I'm going to be a gay guy. I'm going to write about a sex show where somebody's puppeting a dead body, making it have sex with a dude who's a necrophile, while the ghost of that guy watches and goes like, oh, don't do that. Oh my God. And angels are standing next to him going, pass on, it's okay, doesn't matter what happens with your body, it's okay, or putting things in other time periods and putting things in other countries. And the most consciously Canadian thing I was trying to do was to make Toronto seem as creepy as any other city, on the simple basis that if I'm walking down a street in my own mind, I'm walking down a street in Toronto because I've lived here my entire life. I have not lived in London. I have occasionally lived in Australia for like a month, and then I've come back. It's like I can do research and I can put myself in other places, but the slow transition became, but why not write about your own place? Why not write about your own people? Why not write about your own self? Why not? Your own family, your own experiences. Why not write about that? And that took like 15 years. So, when you look at something like The Emperor's Old Bones, for example, that began literally as me watching Empire of the Sun and thinking about J.G. Ballard and going, I could write a piece of fan fiction in which, but no, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Just write a story. Just write an actual story. And then you can do so many more interesting things. And it doesn't have to be J.G. Ballard. And it doesn't have to be Empire of the Sun. And it doesn't have to be any of this. It can be what you want. But that is as far away from Lois Cairns and her son Clark as it's possible to get, and have it still be written by me. So yeah, I think I began in far orbit and slowly moved closer and closer and closer and closer towards the actual gravitational pull of my own creativity, because I always felt that it was, I suppose, déclassé to talk about yourself when you know that you're broken and fucked up, when you inherently know that you're broken and fucked up. Which is weird when you think about it, isn't it? It's like, no, it's like lean into that shit. Lean far, far into that stuff. I mean, which is why I think some of the best stuff that I see right now is coming from people with so much investment in their own identity, because they have to double down because things are getting so fucking bad. You know, some of the best stuff that I see is coming from people of color. Some of the best stuff that I see is coming from queer people. Some of the best stuff that I see is coming from trans people. Some of the best stuff I see is coming from people who are willing to go, you know what? Yeah, put a fucking sign on me. You know, put a star on my chest, put a whatever on my whatever. And certainly that's something I'm thinking about a lot these days because of RFK Jr. and his ridiculousness. It's like, how old are you and you can't figure out its genetics? Or wait a minute, maybe you do figure it out its genetics, and that's why you want to track us and get rid of us. Sucks to be you. Sucks to be us, I suppose. But we're already here, and it's going to be interesting going forward. So that's what I mean when I say that you have to lean into the specificity of who you are. We've been taught that if we're too specific about our own identities and we're too specific about about the things that matter to us and why they matter to us, then we'll be rejected by quote, quote, the normal world. But you know what? There is no normal world. In much the same way that the spectrum includes me and you and my son and all sorts of other people. In fact, the spectrum also includes quote, quote, allistic people, quote, quote, normal people, quote, quote, neurotypical people. The spectrum is it's a circle. It goes all the way around. And nothing human should be alien to us because we are all human. We are all broken. We are all fucked up. And we are stronger at the broken places, and we are more identifiable with at the broken places. I don't know if I've answered your question at all, or if I was just like...
Oh, I believe you've more than answered it.
Oh,
it's so
okay,
interesting.
Sorry.
No, I mean that in a good way. Like it's so much to think about. And I think you're so right. I think I don't know, I'm not as in the publishing industry as you or Mike are, but I do feel this pressure when I see Goodreads, for example, that people don't like morally gray characters and everything you're... They like them to be...
Absolutely. I mean, I there's only one thing that anybody ever said about Lois that depressed me, that made me feel bad, which is there was one woman who said, oh yeah, I tried to read that, but I had to rage quit because of how much she hated her kid. I do not personally think because Lois is me that you can leave that book thinking that she hates her kid. But I do think that we are taught from a very early age to lie about what's bearable and how easy it is to bear, you know? A lot of people don't like being confronted by that, but I really think they should be. I think we wouldn't be in the fucked up place we are right now if people had been allowed to feel their own feelings and being allowed to be uncomfortable and being told, yeah, you know what? It's okay to be uncomfortable, actually, because discomfort tells you that there is something wrong that could be potentially processed, maybe not fixed, but processed. This idea that if we all just pretend everything's nice, then it'll be nice. Just don't talk about slavery. And it wasn't that bad anyway. What the fuck are you on? Well, you're high on fascism. Wow. High on Christian nationalism.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's like, I mean, I find the people I know who are artists, especially narrative artists, seem to be more open to seeing the dark side of themselves in unlikable characters. So this reminds me of, I read an interview with you in the Horror Writers Association, and we're kind of talking about, like specificity and embracing feeling broken or feeling, I guess,
odd.
Feeling odd, feeling
wrong,
othered.
Feeling wrong.
Yeah, exactly. You spoke about the final girl syndrome, in which, to quote you, you say female characters tend to be threatened rather than threatening, younger rather than older, morally clear rather than morally gray, which we were just talking about. We're talking about peering into the dark abyss of ourselves. I love erotic thrillers. That's one of my favorite genres. We've just been watching so much of them, Mike and I, and I've become really interested in, there's often these maybe kind of like BPD, like borderline personality disorder coded characters. And I think that there's a general consensus that this is like bad representation, but like it's a real thing that people experience. I've had traits that I've thought were similar to that, and there's so much agency and power in these often like kind of quote unquote stalker characters, and there's a thrilling kind of, I don't know, like it's just like I don't necessarily see the world in black and white. I don't at all. And so I was just thinking about this in juxtaposition with like the final girl who's kind of, you know, she's so sacred. She's like the Madonna and the horror, whatever. And I just like, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on these feminine representations in dark literature. Like, I don't know, maybe this is not a question so much as an observation, but just like rather than writing off certain, I guess I'm speaking about women characters particularly like as bad, but saying maybe I have a bit of erotic thriller villain in me, or like I have a bit of, you know, whatever in me, and how you feel about that.
Yeah, you know, I was saying to Mike, you know, the building blocks of my process in a lot of ways are echolalia, poetry, fetishism, and spite. And fetishism is a huge thing in my life. God. All right, so this is me talking myself up. I read Black Flame by Gretchen Felker Martin, which was fucking amazing. And I got on Blue Sky and spewed out this, it's fucking amazing, da-da. You know, she DMs me and she's like, oh, I'm so glad you said that. You know, it's like, because I was really inspired by experimental film. And I'm like, what? You know, so we end up having this back and forth conversation. And a lot of it was me going, it's like, your book is so horny and made me so horny in these horny ways. And it's so, you know, it's like so fetishistic and so over the top. And Clive Barker, and, you know, it's like, obviously you have the same intersecting fetishisms that I have, you know, war and wanting to devour the object of your affection, and and just slippy slidey gender stuff, and you wrote yourself into it as the main sex object. You wrote yourself into it. Nobody gets out of experimental film wanting to fuck Lois. You know, it's like, you know, it's like, I mean, yeah, there's something amazingly inspiring about just admitting that you like the things you like. And for me, when I first started to write a full-length novel, it was, you know, a book of tongues, and it was just essentially me going, I've been super depressed and writing nothing but 310 to Yuma fan fiction for a year. I wrote a novel about outlaws having sex, so, you know, it's like, what can I do with this? And this is what came out of it. You know, I had black magic and Aztec gods and, you know, various other things. And I just ran with it. And the cornerstone of that is essentially going, no, you know what? There's going to be a lot of guys boning in this. There's going to be a lot of, you know, like mechanics of man-on-man sex. And if you don't like it, fuck you, so to speak. Or not fuck you, or don't fuck you. You know, it's like, but, you know, it's like, I'm going to write straight into this thing, so to speak. And it's not like I hadn't been doing that before, but it's very different when it's a 300-page book, when you have to live in it for a while, as opposed to going, yeah, oh, no, way too much sodomy in this story. How long does this go on? Okay, skip. You know, it's like, oh man, why did you write about a neo-Nazi guy who wants to turn into a bear? And somebody finds him, who finds how gross his politics are, kind of sexy in a horrible way. You know? Why did you write about that? I just did. It's like, eat it. You know? It's like, so yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. And to go back to what you were actually talking about, the wonderful thing about erotic thrillers is that they are a female gaze thing. You think they're a male gaze thing, but they're not. They're a female gaze thing. The entire genre is, you know, in a lot of ways, it's like, yeah, on the one hand, guys and boobies, guys and butts, you know, people having sex on very uncomfortable looking objects. But there's this ornitopic idea of the world that you get. I used to work in a sex shop, so I read a lot of pornography at one point because there was nothing else to read. And yeah, this pornotopic idea of, like the world is just, it's like no matter what's going on, people are just fucking. It's like, went to the corner store, fucked a guy. Went over here, fucked somebody else. Went over here, it's like there's nothing else that's going on. And you're like, okay, this sounds uncomfortable. And also, it's like, don't you have other things to do with your time? But no, because the idea is that if women are too sexy, they invite bad attention. You have to put it in a thriller sort of, it's like, I'm sorry, you're just too hot. Too hot. You let yourself be too hot. And this is why it's like, so it's almost like your sexuality becomes magic. And it's as opposed to just a part of your life. And suddenly you're in sex world. You're in magic sex world, where things are kind of threatening and people might get killed, but probably not you. People might get killed around you. And for you to be the villain in that situation is even more hot and even more sexy because you are the person with autonomy. And you are the person with drive, and you are the person with the power, right? So if you want to reframe a stalker narrative so that you're the stalker, why not? You could be the stalker and the stalkee. You can lean into that and say, there's something kind of sexy about being stalked when it's me stalking me. It's like the whole idea of people going, well, if women fantasize about rape, why don't they want to be raped? And it's like, that's why you fantasize about it, because you don't want to be raped in real life. But there's something that is interesting about the idea of being overwhelmed, of being swept away, of playing with non-con, of playing with consent in general. And if you don't want to do it in real life because you don't trust people to keep to safe words, if you don't trust people to be giving in their kinkiness, because you don't think that they actually understand how kinky they are, then you're going to fantasize about it, and you're going to fantasize about it super hard. And pretty soon, you're going to be like having sex with werewolves in your brain, and dragons. It's like the people in House of Dragon turned into dragons and then they had dragon sex, or whatever. I mean, again, this is like allowing yourself to be who you are and allowing yourself to go deep dive down as far as you can and go, that's okay. Anything I think is okay as long as I don't inflict it on somebody else in any way that's actually going to hurt them. Which would be in real life. It's like, Gemma, what's wrong with you? Writing about people getting their throats cut. I'll bet you cut people's throats all the time. What? I bit my own thumb once so hard that I could stick my fingernail down in it. But no, actually, I never have cut a person's throat. All of that is fiction. I guess I'm always somewhere between Madonna with a dick in her brain and Prince going, if a man be considered guilty for what goes on in his mind, then give me the electric chair for all my future crimes.
I'm glad you brought up those building blocks of writing.
Yeah.
And it had me thinking about something else you mentioned. You said narrative seems to be your hyperfixation, much like music is your son Cal's. And you said it's for the same reasons: emotional cueing, analysis, power gained through deconstruction and reconstruction.
Yeah.
And I'm quoting your message there. I just love to hear more about how those features show up in your view of narrative as a writer as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that when you find something that you love, at first you just want to contemplate it. But it's funny that we call that consumption, right? It's funny that we call it consuming what you love. It's like, I want more of that. But also, I want to take it and I want to internalize it. I want to stick it inside of me and see, if I bring it back out again, what sticks to it? What are the things that I find fascinating about it? And therefore, how can I build something new out of it? There are like two ways that I consume media. And the first one is to go, oh my God, that's amazing. I need to figure out all the ways in which that is amazing. Most recently, I went back to Gangs of New York after like years. Gangs of New York, which I saw 13 times in the theater, and I never fell asleep, not even during the election sequence. Yeah, I find that movie utterly inspiring and riveting, and I love everything about it. And I love it to such an extent that I actually began to write a BFI book about it for myself.
I want to read that
which,
book.
yeah, a large portion of which is just me going through the film and going, okay, so you may notice this, 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 and this. This is going on in the background. This makes me think of this, and this makes me think of this. You know? It's like here you may notice where we shift from one version of Patty's Lamentation to another version of Patty's Lamentation as we go up one side of the coffin ship and down one side of the coffin ship. With, okay, so there's that. And the second way is that I look at something and I go, well, this is not what I thought it was going to be when I came into it. And it could have gone in a couple of different directions. And I think it would have been better if it had. I mean, it is what it is. This is something that I often found was different between me and other critics, which is very strange to me. It's like I understand production in a way that I think a lot of other critics just don't. It's like, I mean, they're not quite as bad as a student that I had once who genuinely seemed to think that people spun stars, not even directors, because he didn't know what a director was or a producer. Like stars like spun whole movies out of their ass like a spider. It's like you think it and it comes out. It's like, oh my God, you're here to learn film production. What? You literally think that? Who made Castaway? Tom Hanks. No, Tom Hanks was in Castaway. Who made Castaway? You remember all those names at the beginning of the movie? Those are people who worked on the movie. Anyways, I know how long things take. I know the effort that goes into them. So I'm willing to cut a surprising amount of slack. It's like, that's why I say that most things are worth 3 stars, 3 out of 5, because you made a movie. You made a movie and it was fine. You made a movie and it was okay. It told a story. You have to fuck up pretty bad to get lower than 1.5 for me. It's like you have to fuck up really bad. Anyways, the point being that the second way that I consume things is to go, okay, so that didn't work for me, but what were the things that did work and why did they work? And what would I do with those things if I had my druthers? What could I make out of X, 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 and X? And occasionally X, 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 and X aren't even in the same film or the same book or the same story or whatever. And that's where things start to spin. And I'm always thinking about that. I'm always thinking about why things go together and how things don't go together. Why did that end up with that? Wait a minute. I think you don't actually know what a werewolf is. I think you actually have a weird idea of what a werewolf is. And that's kind of fascinating. But yeah. If werewolves worked the way that you think they do, how could I work with that and make a mythology that made sense? And when I'm saying make sense, it's particularly funny because the way that mythology makes sense, of course, is a poetic way. It's assonant, it's resonant, it's magical, but it has to have some kind of internal continuity. And it's more an emotional internal continuity than it is a practical internal continuity. So yeah, those are the ways that I approach stuff like that. Have I answered your question or was there something else?
No, I think you have. I listened to your interview on the Losers Club podcast, which was a fantastic interview.
Oh,
And
thank
that
you.
has me thinking, yeah, it was really, really interesting. And in that interview, you said that horror and the numinous cross over into faith. And you talked about the awe and awfulness. And this
Yes.
really connected with me. This is
Oh,
something
yeah.
I love about horror fiction, both as a reader and a writer. These are things I like to explore. How do you tap into that sense of awe? I did an interview about the challenges of writing the numinous with Kathy Koja. I was just curious to hear how you think about this task. How do you write the numinous?
Okay, so I've often said that horror is in fact not a ghetto inside a ghetto inside a ghetto. People reject it because when they think about horror, they think about the idea of the intersection of gore and porno streets, and that's it. But the fact is that horror exists inside of everything because existential dread exists inside of everything. We are the only animals that know that we're going to die and spend a lot of time trying not to think about that fact. And so there is a hole at the middle of everything. We're all orbiting around that hole. We know that we're going to go into the hole at some point. We don't know what's in the hole. And these are the basic truths of human existence. There's also love, and there's also beauty, and there's also moments of incredible connection to the universe and to everything around us and to each other. But then there's that event horizon, right? And it's getting closer and closer. And everything wears out and everything stretches thin. And as things stretch thin, you can begin to see shadows as if behind a scrim. This is actually something that Straub began to talk about himself near the end of his life, which was very interesting to me, particularly in, oh my God, that book that has dark in the title.
The Dark Matter. I love that book.
Yeah, A Dark Matter. Particularly in A Dark Matter, this idea that moments that are numinous do not have to be consoling. And in fact, most of the time they're not, because it's like a little hole tearing in the fabric of reality, and you see something behind it, and you're like, I don't know what the fuck that was. You know? Maybe one day I will, but maybe I'll be so different, so changed, that I won't care about what the fuck that was. And so a lot of it has to do with that. It has to do with this glimpse of something unknowable, but unknowable at this moment, unknowable from your angle, unknowable through the filter of human experience. And that's almost like believing that God exists. One of the things I always loved about science was that I could understand biology more than I could understand physics. But both biology and physics reach a point at which, at some point, it's like, what happens after that? No idea. We don't know. You know, it's like, it just gets too small. It just gets too big. It just gets too far away. It just gets, it's like, what's in there? Nothing. Or maybe not nothing. We don't know. We're left in this place where it's equally awful that things end, and it's equally awful if things don't end, if things don't ever end. And it's a strange place to be, but much like the general existential dread at the heart of horror, it is a universal understanding. It is a universal note. And even people who are doing their level fucking best never to think about that. If you pluck that string, they're going to be like, oh, God. You know, it's like, even if you don't believe in God, and I don't think that I may believe in a creative instinct, but I don't believe in any version of, you know, Whitebeard guy doesn't like how you screw. What I find is that the moment that you realize that you're going to die, or you think you're going to die, what do? You call out to God. You go, Jesus Christ, or, oh God, or, you know, it's like, someone do something about this. Someone help me. Someone. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that someone is something inside of you. And maybe that something is a moment of resonance with the rest of the existent universe as you butt up against the not so existent universe. Not non-existent because it's something, but we just don't know what it is. Matter and antimatter, creation and decreation, the generative impulse and the degenerative impulse, and eventually the nothingness at the center of the candle flame. So yeah, that to me is what writing the numinous is about. And it's always that moment, not so much of understanding, but of wanting to understand almost. Yeah, it's a moment like it's a moment like Picnic at Hanging Rock, where you're like, well, something really did happen. What was it? I don't know. I don't know. I almost saw it. I'm so glad I didn't actually see it. But maybe I would have wanted to. But I almost figured it out. So it's like that moment before understanding, that moment where it's like for a second you thought you saw something. That to me is the numinous. And that to me is inherent in most horror. Definitely the kind of horror that speaks to me. It's the thing that binds cosmic horror and folk horror together. And folk horror is definitely one of my favorite. And cosmic horror is the one that fucks me up the most. Why? Because they're the two ends of the scale, aren't they? One's entirely about the created world. It's entirely about matter. And then the other one is about all the stuff that we don't know, all the stuff that we can't see, all the emptiness between things.
Okay, so this is kind of switching gears. In your interview with Horror Tree, you say that fiction writing is as much of a job as being a journalist or a film critic. So I'm curious, Gemma, what does your daily routine as a fiction writer look like, and how do you feel about making your passion into a vocation?
It's hard because, some days it's difficult to just get time for yourself. And I carry around notebooks. I write little bits of things down. I write things on my notes app and I send them to myself as emails. It's like receiving emails from a demented person. That thing with the guy that one time. And a lot of my process is ideas, notes, transcribing notes, breaking those transcribed notes out into documents, and then finding the right entry point in each document and starting to hammer. When I can get into a good rhythm, I guess a hyperfixed rhythm, I can usually write up to 2,000 words a day, and on a good day, I'll write my 2,000 words, and then for the rest of the day, things will occur to me and I'll write them down. And so at the beginning of the next day, I can transcribe all those notes and add them and move stuff around and then hammer out another 2,000 words a day. So I'm entirely capable of writing a short story in a week. I had a year where I wrote a short story every month, and that was nice. But that kind of work is hard to do consistently, not least because I'm doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time, because, I've got email and I've got articles and, some and interviews and stuff like that. And I write a lot of different stuff as well. I write a fair amount of poetry, which doesn't really make it out into the world very much, but I think it's useful. It's particularly useful because poetry is like the poetry and lyrics, I guess, probably are like the shortest way to tell a story and the most intense way to tell a story. My friend Simon Bestwick occasionally writes entire stories in a version of poetry. So it's like a monologue, or it's like it's like this and then this and then this and then this. And I'm like, that's really wonderful because you actually got it out. And now you could turn it into a real story. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Nah, it's fun this way. So yeah, a lot of it is just getting stuff down. And I got to say that I find, people have been talking about recently about, is handwriting going the way of the dodo? Are people just not going to handwrite anything? And I'm like, well, I'm going to be handwriting till I die because it is a kind of practice for me in a Buddhist way, in a religious way, in a vocational way. And I often find that, much like Harriet the Spy, if I can't write down my thoughts, it's sort of like I didn't think them, and certainly like I don't understand them particularly well. I don't understand why I was thinking about that particular thing. So I journal, and, it's like at the moment I've got like journal entries at one part of the book and notes at the other part of the book. So over here it's like, June 21st, 2024, waiting for Aggie to pick me up so we can go see Mom's play, a three-hander somewhere outside Toronto. Over here, on the other hand, it's like, two trans men fighting in World War I have their gender affirmed by a folk horror entity whose home their group intrudes upon. There are creatures here, male creatures I will devour. And they're basically like, on the one hand, thanks a lot, and on the other hand, fuck you. Yeah, so that's my daily process. But in and around that, if I'm writing at home, I'm dealing with Cal, I'm cooking, I'm doing chores, I'm organizing stuff, I'm cleaning stuff. If I want to concentrate, I pretty much have to go out to a coffee shop, and I just don't get a lot of opportunity to do that right now. However, things go in and then things go out.
Because you've brought up poetry several times, this is just something that I keep thinking about as you speak, which is, you mentioned Dalaire's Greek myths, which I know that sounds like the Norse, the blue book spoke to you more than the yellow book, but I'm a firmly Greek, and like Mike had never really read the Greek myths, so when we met, I became more interested. I was like, how would I approach those myths if I were an adult now? And I tried to, I haven't made too much progress in it, but I picked up Ovid's Metamorphoses, the Ted Hughes translation, and it's just so interesting because you talk about, like vampires and werewolves and like extreme emotion, and it didn't occur to me until I started looking at Ovid, the source text, that so much of it is about the human experience just being so extreme that it transforms you. And so I thought I'd just bring this up.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah, the Greek myths are very much about passion. The Greek gods are human beings that are huge, literally and figuratively. And the way that they interact with the world is that they want to fuck it. The way that they interact with the world is that, it's like everything's alive and they want to have kids with it. And they do have kids with it. And it's fascinating in that particular way. I remember the whole thing about noticing at one point that they spend, I think, 2 or 3 pages talking about how all the monsters, like the Nemean lion, and not the Cyclops, but the Hydra, and Scylla and Charybdis. And, it's like all of these creatures are essentially related to each other in the same way that the gods are related to each other. So everything is like a family. And over here you have the wonderful deific family, and over here you have the terrible monstrous family, which needs to be destroyed. It's like, we're just going to destroy this guy because we need to destroy him. Apollyon, the guy with like 3 bodies and a big dragon tail who is wrapped around a mountain and throws rocks at people. It's like, no, we can't have that. But we can have this guy who comes down in a shower of gold and has sex with your daughter because you put her in a tower to make sure that no god would have sex with her. We're absolutely fine with this guy who turns himself into a swan and has sex with a woman, and then she gives birth to 2 eggs, and one has a half human daughter in it and the other one has a normal daughter in it. It's like, yep, sure, fine, why not? And you're right, it's all about passion, and it's so fecund, or it's so destructive. It's like, I've had this baby, it's so ugly, I'm just gonna throw it out of heaven. It's gonna land in the sea with the strength of a meteorite. And then later, we find out it makes beautiful things and let it back into Olympus. Yeah, comparatively, the Norse gods seem more like the law and order side of human beings, which is strange because, let's face it, they invented a legal system. The Vikings invented a legal system because people were killing each other too much. It's like, you just can't kill somebody every time they move a boundary stone, man. You can't. I will take you to the thing, and I will demand blood guilt from you. All gods and all monsters are human beings writ large and strange. So I think that the Greek gods are everywhere because they're just us doing dumb stuff. And it's like us if we were constantly drunk, constantly, and going like, oh yeah, I want to have sex with that tree. And then half tree children end up at their house, and their wife is like, again, what? It's like that time that 3-year-old showed up with a lyre. It's like, and stole all our cows. What was that about? Anyway.
Amazing. Yeah, they're pretty bacchanal for sure. So
yeah.
Wonderful.
The Maenads are one of my favorite things.
I loved your short story, This Is Not For You. Is that what it's called, about the Maenads? Yeah, it was excellent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, apparently Gretchen did too.
It's always so exciting.
It is actually. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I never feel cool. I always feel old. I always feel weird and like I'm off in a corner. So when people acknowledge me, it is kind of like,
I think it's fair to say you loom large in the dark fiction world. I think that's just, yeah, most definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I see your influence all over the place. So first thing, I just want to thank you again so much for coming on. And then I wanted to ask, before I forgot, since you brought up Black Flame, which I keep hearing great things about, have you read anything else recently that's particularly excited you or stood out or...
Oh, God, I'm reading stuff all the time, and I tend to fall asleep listening to stuff. So most recently, I think I was reading Barrowback by Andrew Michael Hurley, which is a series of linked short stories all set in the same place. I think he originally wrote them to be read on the radio in Britain, and he's the guy who did Starbaker and The Loney, and... yeah, it's amazing. They start in prehistory and they go to like 2024, and very folk horror-y, very weird, very numinous. And Barrowback is definitely a place with a big vein of strange going through it. So really enjoying that. And otherwise, Bright Dead Star, the most recent Caitlin Kernan, which unfortunately does not include her Zoetrope Bazaar, which is another haunted, weird film book that I really want to read. And before that, well, I went back and I reread The Reddening, because there are 2 Adam Neville books that I've never really managed to make it all the way through. And I'm going back over the ones that I have read so that I can do that. And before that, The Rotting Room. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The Rotting Room is by a woman named Viggy Parr Hampton. And it's a novella which contains some of the things that I like most in life. Gemma, what is best in life? Nuns, relics, decay, decomposition, bad decisions. Plague. Yes, I think probably both of you might like it. So it's called The Rotting Room.
Well, I love a good nun and reliquary. I went to the cloisters in New York a few years ago, and there is so much decay there. So The Rotting Room sounds exciting to me.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome.
Anything you wanted to plug before we...
Well, the new book that I have coming out is Little Horn Stories. It's from Shortwave. It's going to be coming out in October. And as usual, it's short stories, but I'm really happy with it. And I'm hoping that people will like it. It's got some fun stuff in it. surprising amount of stuff about music. I think on some level, I was listening to some black metal the other day and thinking, I really like the lyrical content of this, and I don't really like the way it sounds. If you could find a way to, to tell like a lyrical story, a black metal lyrical story, but with, like doom or, some kind of doom backing or, some kind of like more like Rhea's Obsession or something like that. And I was like, oh, fuck, you're going to end up, you're going to end up starting a band that's just you looping your voice over and over. But yeah, music is a big thing for me. And I find it funny that it's finally started to move into my actual work.
Very excited for the new collection. Yeah, and just tell our listeners to buy, read, and review every Gemma Files book you can.
Please.
Amazing writer,
Absolutely.
Amazing body of
I'll
work. So, yeah.
And she'll just talk and talk.
It's been such a delight.
Oh,
so much fun.
No, really fun to talk to you guys too. I really, really enjoyed your questions.
Thank you so much, Gemma.
Take care, Gemma. Happy writing. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.